You think you know the law better than me? Officer Derek Vaughn asked, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the evening noise outside the hotel. Malcolm Hayes stood beside a dark sedan beneath the pale lights of the parking structure, one hand resting loosely at his side, the other visible near the edge of the trunk. He had already shown identification. He had already explained that he was leaving a legal conference. He had already answered every question Derek had asked. Still, the officer remained planted in front of him as if the answers had only created new reasons to stay. Malcolm looked at Derek for a long second. "No, Officer Vaughn. I do not think that." Derek gave a short, skeptical laugh. "Could have fooled me." Malcolm said nothing. Around them, the hotel continued with its ordinary rhythm. A valet guided a sport utility vehicle toward the curb. Two conference guests crossed the entrance carrying leather bags. A security camera watched from above the garage doors. Another camera covered the hotel driveway. Derek's body camera remained active on his chest. Malcolm noticed all of it. Derek seemed to notice only him. "You have been questioning every instruction since I walked up," Derek said. "I have been asking what justifies the detention." "Same difference." "No," Malcolm replied quietly. "It is not." The answer made Derek's expression tighten. "You people always think knowing a few legal words changes how this works." Malcolm's eyes settled on him. The phrase hung in the air longer than Derek seemed to realize. Malcolm did not raise his voice. He did not react with anger. He simply asked, "Which instruction have I refused?" Derek hesitated. Malcolm waited. That silence seemed to irritate the officer more than an argument would have. "Do not play games with me," Derek said. "I am not playing a game." "Then stop acting like you are running this stop." Malcolm glanced toward the small illuminated indicator on Derek's body camera. "I am asking for clarity." Derek followed his eyes and understood what Malcolm had noticed. "You worried about the camera?" Malcolm almost smiled. "No." That answer landed strangely. Derek had expected nervousness, defensiveness, maybe an attempt to explain himself again. Instead, Malcolm stood with the stillness of someone who understood that time, words, and sequence mattered. Derek pointed toward the briefcase resting on the trunk. "Open it." Malcolm looked at the case, then back at him. "Are you requesting consent to search it?" Derek's jaw tightened. "I am telling you to cooperate." That does not answer the question. A hotel security manager near the valet station had begun watching. One guest slowed near the lobby doors. Derek lowered his voice. "You want to argue technicalities, you can explain all of this to a judge." Malcolm's expression changed then, but only slightly. The tension left his face. A faint smile appeared. Not mocking, not nervous. Certain. "I will." Derek stared at him. "What?" Malcolm held his gaze. "I said I will." For the first time since the stop began, Derek looked uncertain. He did not know that Malcolm had spent years in courtrooms where rank, confidence, and reputation became meaningless the moment evidence entered the record. He did not know the black man standing in front of him was Colonel Malcolm Hayes, a senior military judge who had built a career around one principle. Authority was legitimate only when it could explain itself. Malcolm had no intention of revealing that yet. If Derek was right, the facts would protect him. If Derek was wrong, Malcolm's title should not be the reason anyone finally cared. Derek straightened. "Right now, you are being detained." Malcolm nodded once. "Then state the basis clearly." Derek looked at him, then at the camera on his own chest. The evening seemed to grow quieter. Malcolm's faint smile remained. He was not smiling because he knew who he was. He was smiling because Derek had just chosen the one place where every assumption would eventually have to answer to proof. 90 minutes earlier, Malcolm Hayes had been standing beneath the warm lights of a conference room on the second floor of the same hotel, answering one final question from a young Army captain who had remained after most of the audience had left. Chairs scraped softly across the carpet as officers gathered folders and closed. Laptops. Hotel staff waited near the rear doors, ready to reset the room for another event. Malcolm wore a dark civilian suit with no insignia, no ribbons, and nothing that announced rank. The captain held a notebook against his chest. "Sir, how do you know when authority has gone too far?" Malcolm considered the question before answering. Usually when the person using it stops asking whether the decision is justified and starts believing the position itself is justification. The captain wrote that down. Malcolm continued. "Procedure does not weaken authority. It proves authority deserves to be trusted." He did not say it for effect. He had spent decades believing it. He had seen respected leaders make difficult decisions without losing discipline, and he had seen careless people become more certain the less evidence they had. Major Allison Reed approached from the center aisle carrying a leather portfolio. "Colonel, the remaining materials are packed." Malcolm nodded. "Thank you." Allison glanced toward the doors. "Your driver can bring the car around. I will walk. It is getting cold outside." Malcolm smiled. "It is 52 degrees. I will survive the parking lot." Allison shook her head. "You could make life easier occasionally." Malcolm picked up his briefcase. Easy and useful are not always the same thing. The young captain thanked him and left. Allison watched Malcolm straighten the papers inside his case. "You know, most people here have no idea what your actual position is. That is fine. You like that?" Malcolm looked at her. "Sometimes people tell you more when they do not think anyone important is listening." Allison gave him a knowing look. Titles changed posture. Rank changed language. Malcolm had learned long ago that authority could reveal character simply by entering a room, which was why he sometimes preferred leaving his own authority outside it. At 6:30 that evening, he crossed the hotel lobby and stepped into the cool air. Dry leaves moved along the curb beneath the yellow parking lights. Several conference guests were leaving at the same time. Two white men in dark suits walked ahead of him, one carrying a laptop bag and the other holding a leather briefcase. Malcolm followed at an unhurried pace, checking a message from Allison about the next morning's schedule. Near the parking structure, he reached his sedan, placed the briefcase on the trunk, and glanced at the time. A patrol vehicle turned into the hotel driveway behind him. Malcolm barely noticed it. The car passed the first man in the dark suit. Then it rolled past the second. Both carried bags. Both were near parked vehicles. The patrol car continued another 20 yards before slowing beside Malcolm. He looked up. Officer Derek Vaughn was watching him through the windshield. The driver's door opened. Derek stepped out and looked first at Malcolm, then at the sedan, then at the briefcase resting on the trunk. "Sir." Malcolm turned fully toward him. "Good evening." Derek walked closer with the measured confidence of someone who believed he had already found the person he was looking for. "What are you doing back here?" Malcolm glanced once toward the hotel entrance. "Leaving." Derek looked at the car. "This yours?" "Yes." Derek held out his hand. "Identification." Malcolm studied him for one quiet second before reaching slowly toward his jacket. The request itself did not trouble him. What caught his attention was something simpler. Derek had driven past two other men who looked just as much like a vague description as Malcolm did. He had stopped only for him. Malcolm removed his driver's license slowly and held it where Derek could see it. Derek took the card, glanced at the name, then looked toward the sedan. "This vehicle registered to you?" Malcolm nodded. "Yes." Derek studied the license again. "What are you doing near the garage?" Malcolm looked briefly toward the hotel entrance. "I just left a legal conference. I am going home." Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of legal conference?" "Military justice." The answer should have reduced the uncertainty. Instead, it seemed to create another reason for Derek to keep questioning him. "You military?" Derek asked. "Yes." "Active duty?" Malcolm paused. "Officer Vaughn, what exactly was reported?" Derek looked at him for a moment. "We got a call about somebody. Checking parked vehicles." "What description did the caller give?" Derek shifted his weight. "Male. Dark clothing. Carrying a bag." Malcolm glanced toward the hotel. One of the white men Derek had driven past was still near the garage elevator, wearing a dark suit and carrying a black laptop bag. The other was loading a briefcase into a parked sport utility vehicle. Malcolm returned his attention to Derek. "Race?" Derek hesitated. "Was not specified." "Height?" "Around 6 feet." "Age?" "Nothing useful." "Specific vehicle?" "No." Malcolm nodded once. "Then what specifically connected me to the report?" Derek's expression tightened. "You matched what we had. So did the men you passed before stopping here." Silence settled between them. Derek looked toward the hotel entrance, then back at Malcolm. "Maybe let me conduct the investigation." "I am letting you conduct it." Malcolm's voice remained measured. "I am asking what the investigation is based on." Derek folded his arms. "You always talk like this." Malcolm almost smiled. "When details matter." Derek pointed toward the briefcase resting on the trunk. "What is in there?" "Conference materials." "Open it." Malcolm looked at him carefully. "Are you asking for consent to search it?" Derek's jaw shifted. "I am asking you to cooperate." "Those are different things." The small indicator on Derek's body camera remained illuminated. Malcolm noticed it without turning his head. Above the driveway, hotel cameras covered the entrance and the lane leading toward the garage. At the valet station, Ethan Miller, the hotel security manager, had stopped reviewing paperwork and was now watching the exchange. Malcolm registered each detail automatically. Derek reached for his radio and requested a registration check on the sedan. While dispatch processed the request, he looked back at Malcolm. "What exactly do you do in the military?" "Legal work." "Lawyer?" Malcolm allowed a brief pause. "Something like that." Derek gave a humorless laugh. "That explains the attitude." Malcolm looked at him. "No, it explains the vocabulary." The radio came alive. Dispatch confirmed the sedan was registered to Malcolm Hayes at the same address. Listed on his license. No stolen vehicle alert. No outstanding issue connected to the registration. Derek heard it clearly. Malcolm did too. For a moment, Malcolm expected the encounter to end. The original report was vague. His identity was verified. The car was his. Several other men nearby fit the same general description. The facts were becoming simpler. Derek's expression was not. "We are not finished," he said. Malcolm checked the time. It was 6:39 in the evening. "Then what fact keeps this detention going?" Derek stared at him. Something had shifted. The stop no longer seemed driven only by uncertainty about the report. Malcolm recognized the change immediately. Suspicion had brought Derek to the sedan. Pride was beginning to keep him there. Malcolm held Derek's gaze after asking what fact still justified the detention. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The hotel driveway continued moving around them as if nothing unusual was happening. A sedan rolled toward the valet stand. A couple crossed beneath the lobby lights. Somewhere inside the parking structure, an elevator bell sounded and disappeared into the evening noise. Derek finally looked toward Malcolm's briefcase, then back at him. "You match the description." Malcolm nodded once. The description was a man in dark clothing carrying a bag. He glanced toward the garage entrance. "There are several men here who match that." Derek's expression tightened. "You are the one I am talking to." "That is true." Malcolm's voice stayed controlled. "It does not explain why." Before Derek could answer, Ethan Miller stepped away from the valet station and approached carefully, stopping several feet from both men. "Officer Vaughn, if this is about someone checking vehicles, our cameras cover the garage entrance and the front drive. I can pull the footage right now." Derek turned toward him. "I will ask if I need it." Ethan hesitated. "It could show exactly who was near which cars." "I said I have it handled." Malcolm watched the exchange without changing expression. Another way to verify the report had just appeared. Derek let it pass. "Mr. Hayes, stay where you are." Malcolm looked at him. "Am I being formally detained?" "Yes." "For investigative purposes?" "Yes." "Then please state the specific conduct that supports continuing it." Derek exhaled through his nose. "You keep trying to control this stop." Malcolm shook his head. "No, I am trying to understand the basis for it." A guest near the lobby doors had slowed and raised a telephone, holding it at chest level. Derek noticed. Malcolm noticed something else. The body camera was still recording. The hotel cameras were still recording. Ethan was still standing there as an independent witness. Time, sequence, language, choice. Malcolm stored each detail quietly. Derek pointed again toward the briefcase. "Open the case." Malcolm looked at it, then back at him. "Do you have a warrant?" "I do not need a warrant to ask." "Correct." Malcolm paused. "And I do not have to consent because you asked." Derek's jaw tightened. "You really enjoy making this difficult." "I prefer clear boundaries." The response seemed to irritate him more than open defiance would have. Derek reached for his radio and asked dispatch whether the original caller had provided anything more specific. The answer came back after a short delay. No additional clothing details. No race. No confirmed vehicle. No report of entry into any car. Malcolm heard every word. Ethan did too. Derek lowered the radio. For a moment, the path out of the encounter was obvious. Verify the footage. End the stop. Move on. Instead, Derek said, "We are still sorting this out." Malcolm checked the time. It was 6:44 in the evening. "What new information are you sorting?" Derek's face hardened. "You can stop with the legal questions." Malcolm looked directly at him. "They are factual questions." The guest with the telephone shifted slightly to keep both men in view. Ethan remained nearby, ready to provide the footage Derek had declined. The vehicle registration was already confirmed. Dispatch had added nothing. Every available fact was reducing suspicion, yet Derek's certainty seemed to be growing. You think all this is going to matter later? Derek asked. Malcolm glanced briefly toward the cameras, then back at him. Yes. Derek gave a dismissive smile. Then you can explain it to a judge. Malcolm's expression softened almost imperceptibly. That is exactly where facts belong. Derek mistook the calmness for arrogance. Malcolm understood it as discipline. By then, the real question was no longer why Derek had stopped him. It was why, after every reasonable opportunity to verify the truth, he still refused to let the truth end the detention. At 6:48 that evening, Derek Vaughn finally opened his notebook and wrote the words investigative detention across the top of a fresh page. Malcolm Hayes watched him do it and understood exactly what had changed. A conversation could be forgotten. A record could not. For accuracy, Malcolm said, "You have confirmed my identity, confirmed that the vehicle belongs to me, received no additional description from dispatch, and declined the hotel's offer to review security footage." Derek looked up. "You do not get to write my report for me." Malcolm's expression remained calm. "I am not writing it. I am making sure the sequence is clear." Ethan Miller stood near the valet station, still ready to provide access to the hotel cameras. The guest near the lobby doors continued recording with his telephone. Derek glanced toward both of them, then back at Malcolm. "You really think this helps you?" Malcolm answered quietly. "I think an accurate record helps everyone." Derek closed the notebook for a moment. "You military lawyers always talk like every conversation is a hearing." Malcolm almost smiled. "Not every conversation. Only the ones where facts keep changing and authority refuses to notice." The sentence landed harder than Derek expected. "You think you know the law better than me?" he asked. Malcolm held his gaze. "No, Officer Vaughn. I think the law applies to both of us." Derek gave a short laugh. "Fine. You want to debate it, you can tell it to a judge." Malcolm's face softened into the faintest smile. "I will." Derek frowned. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Exactly what I said." The answer was quiet. "Certain." Derek stared at him for a second. "You threatening me?" No, Malcolm did not hesitate. A fair review is not a threat. That seemed to bother Derek. More than anger would have. He reopened the notebook and began writing again. "I am documenting that you remained argumentative during the stop." Malcolm looked at him. "Then document the questions I asked." Derek stopped writing. "You do not know when to let something go." Malcolm checked his watch. It was 6:51 in the evening. "I know exactly when to let something go, when the facts support it." Ethan stepped forward again. "Officer, security has the footage ready. It would take less than 5 minutes." Derek looked toward him. For the third time, verification was being offered without resistance, delay, or complication. "I will request it later if I need it." Ethan nodded slowly and stepped back. Malcolm said nothing. He did not need to. The body camera had heard the offer. The witness had seen it. The hotel system had preserved it. Derek looked at Malcolm. "You are going to wait while I finish documenting this. Am I free to leave after that?" Derek hesitated. The pause was brief, but Malcolm noticed it. "Yes." Malcolm nodded once. "Then I will wait." No argument. No raised voice. No attempt to mention rank. He simply stood beside his sedan while Derek completed the form. A few minutes later, Derek returned Malcolm's license and gave him the detention notice. "You are free to go." Malcolm took the paper, folded it once, and placed it inside his briefcase. Derek expected one final complaint. Malcolm gave him none. Instead, he looked toward Ethan. "Please preserve the security footage from this time period." Ethan nodded. "I will." Derek looked between them. "For what?" Malcolm turned back to him. "For accuracy." Then he closed the briefcase and walked toward the driver's door. Derek watched him leave with the uncomfortable feeling that the encounter had not ended when he said Malcolm was free to go. In truth, the most important part had just begun. Derek believed he had controlled the stop because he controlled the badge, the questions, and the report. Malcolm understood something different. The moment evidence existed outside one man's version of events, control had already started to change hands. At 7:12 that evening, Derek Vaughn sat beneath the fluorescent lights of the precinct and began turning the hotel encounter into a report. The screen in front of him reduced nearly 20 minutes of tension into clean lines and neutral language. Suspicious person call. General description. Investigative detention. Identity confirmed. Vehicle ownership verified. Subject released without arrest. Derek paused before typing the next sentence. Subject remained argumentative throughout the encounter. He read it once, then left it there. Captain Stephen Brooks approached from behind, carrying a paper cup of coffee. Anything serious? Derek leaned back. Nothing major. Guy outside the hotel kept challenging every question. Brooks glanced at the report. The military conference. Yeah. Did you find anything connecting him to the original call? Derek looked toward the screen. Not enough for an arrest. Brooks waited. That was not what I asked. Derek's expression tightened. The description matched. How closely? Male. Dark clothes. Bag. Brooks looked at him. At a hotel hosting a military legal conference? Derek did not answer. Brooks nodded toward the monitor. Body camera running? The entire time. Hotel cameras? Probably. Then make sure your report matches what they show. Derek gave a faint, irritated smile. It does. Across town, Malcolm Hayes sat with Major Allison Reed in a quiet conference room while the last hotel staff cleared equipment from the symposium. His detention notice rested on the table between them. Allison read it twice. You never told him what you actually do? No. Not even after he kept extending the stop? Malcolm shook his head. Allison studied him. You could have ended that encounter much sooner. Maybe. Why did you not? Malcolm looked toward the dark windows overlooking the parking lot. Because a title should not be required before someone checks the facts. Allison leaned back. What do you want me to do? Nothing informal. Meaning? Ask counsel to preserve the hotel footage. Request the dispatch audio and body camera recording through the proper process. Preserve the written report. Allison nodded. And command. No, department leadership. Only if procedure requires it. She watched him carefully. And if Officer Vaughn was justified? Malcolm answered without hesitation. Then the evidence should protect him. And if he was not? Malcolm folded the detention notice and placed it inside the briefcase. Then the same evidence should protect the next person. Later that evening, Brooks returned to Derek's report after noticing the reference to a military justice conference. The name Malcolm Hayes bothered him, not because it seemed familiar, but because the man's vocabulary and composure on Derek's summary did not sound accidental. Brooks opened the public website for the military judiciary and entered the name. A professional biography appeared. Colonel Malcolm Hayes, senior military judge, decades of military legal service. Brooks stared at the screen for several seconds, then called across the room. Derek. Derek looked up. What? Brooks motioned him over. Your guy from the hotel. Derek approached the desk. Brooks turned the monitor toward him. Derek read the first line once. Then again. The color left some of the certainty from his expression. He is a judge? A senior military judge. Derek looked at the photograph beside the biography. Same calm face. Same measured eyes. He remembered Malcolm asking whether the search request was consensual. He remembered the registration check. The security manager offering footage. The faint smile when Derek mentioned court. Why did he not tell me? Derek asked. Brooks looked at him. Maybe because he wanted to know whether you needed his title before you treated the facts seriously. Derek said nothing. Brooks clicked open Derek's report again and pointed to the phrase argumentative throughout the encounter. His rank does not decide whether your stop was reasonable. Derek stared at the words he had written less than an hour earlier. Brooks continued. The recordings will. For the first time that night, Derek understood that discovering Malcolm's identity was not the most dangerous part of the situation. The dangerous part was that Malcolm had never needed to reveal it at all. The next morning, Captain Stephen Brooks arrived at the precinct. Before the day's shift settled in and opened Derek Vaughn's body camera footage. Derek stood beside the desk with a paper cup of coffee he had barely touched. On the screen, Malcolm Hayes appeared exactly as Brooks had expected from the public biography and nothing like Derek's report suggested. Calm, precise, controlled. Brooks watched the first few minutes without comment. Malcolm provided identification. He answered where he had been. He explained that he was leaving a military justice conference. Then came the questions. Description, vehicle, consent, basis for detention. Each one was measured. None of them sounded hostile. Brooks paused the recording. Your report says he was argumentative. Derek looked at the frozen image. He kept challenging me. Show me where. Derek frowned. Brooks resumed the video. The registration check played through the speakers. Malcolm's sedan was confirmed. No outstanding issue. Then Ethan Miller stepped into view and offered immediate access to the hotel cameras. Derek's recorded voice declined. Brooks paused it again. Why did you not look at the footage? Derek shifted his weight. I did not think I needed it yet. Brooks looked at him. You had a vague description, a confirmed vehicle owner, and a security manager offering video that could settle the question. What were you waiting for? Derek looked toward the screen. I thought his behavior still gave me reason to continue. Brooks restarted the video. Malcolm asked another factual question. No raised voice. No refusal. No attempt to leave. Brooks let the silence after the clip sit for a moment. Knowing how to ask precise questions is not suspicious behavior. Derek stared at the desk. Across town, Major Allison Reed met Malcolm in a small office beside the conference center. A confirmation email from hotel security was open on her laptop. Ethan preserved all 3 relevant camera angles, she said. Counsel also sent a formal preservation request for the dispatch audio, body camera recording, written report, and related communications. Malcolm nodded. Good. Allison studied him. The department knows who you are now. I assumed they would eventually. Still no call. To senior command? No. No request that Officer Vaughn be removed? Malcolm shook his head. Allison leaned back. Most people with your authority would use it. Malcolm looked at her. That is exactly why I will not. She waited. If he was right, the evidence should protect him, Malcolm continued. If he was wrong, then the same evidence should protect whoever comes after me. By 10:15 that morning, the preservation request reached Brooks. He read it twice. No demand for punishment. No military pressure. No threat. Just a list of records to retain. Brooks handed it to Derek. This is all they asked for. Derek scanned the page. So he is building a case. Brooks shook his head. He is preserving the record. Whether there is a case depends on what the record proves. Derek looked back toward Malcolm's name. He could have called half the military legal system. He did not. Brooks opened the body camera footage again and moved to the final minutes. Derek's voice filled the room. You can explain it to a judge. Then Malcolm's reply came through, quiet and steady. I will. Brooks stopped the video. You thought that was a threat. Derek looked at the screen. At the time. And now. Derek took a long breath. Now I think he was telling me to make sure I could explain myself later. Brooks nodded once. That morning, Derek began to understand the part of Malcolm Hayes he had misread from the beginning. The man had not stayed calm because he lacked power. He had stayed calm because he understood what real power was supposed to look like when it chose not to abuse itself. 3 weeks later, Derek Vaughn walked into the county courthouse carrying the same report he had written the night outside the hotel. By then, Malcolm Hayes had pursued a civil challenge through the proper legal process, and the preserved recordings had become part of an evidentiary hearing focused on one narrow question: whether Derek had reasonable grounds to keep the detention going after the available facts began pointing in the opposite direction. Judge Caroline Mercer took the bench shortly after 9 that morning. Malcolm sat at one table in a dark civilian suit, without a uniform, insignia, or anything that announced military rank. Major Allison Reed sat several seats behind him with counsel. Derek noticed that immediately. He had expected the room to remind everyone who Malcolm was. Instead, Malcolm had done everything possible to make the hearing about what happened, not about who he happened to be. Judge Mercer began with the dispatch recording. The caller described a man near parked vehicles wearing dark clothing and carrying a bag. No race. No specific age. No confirmed vehicle. No report that anyone had entered a car. Then the hotel security footage played. Malcolm appeared on the screen leaving the conference area, walking directly toward his sedan, placing his briefcase on the trunk, and checking his telephone. He never approached another vehicle. A second camera angle showed Derek's patrol car entering the property. It passed 2 white conference guests in dark suits carrying bags before stopping beside Malcolm. Derek shifted slightly in his chair. Judge Mercer watched the footage twice. Next came the vehicle registration audio. Malcolm's sedan was confirmed as his. Nothing suspicious appeared in the return. Then Ethan Miller's recorded statement was introduced, documenting that he had offered immediate access to the hotel cameras while Malcolm was still being detained. Judge Mercer looked toward Derek. Officer Vaughn, why did you decline footage that could have confirmed or eliminated the original suspicion? Derek leaned toward the microphone. I believed I still needed to clarify the situation. Based on what? Derek looked down at his report. His behavior. Describe the behavior. He was argumentative. Judge Mercer nodded toward the screen. Then let us review that. The body camera footage began. Malcolm's voice filled the courtroom. Calm. Measured. He asked for the caller description. He asked whether opening the briefcase was a request for consent. He asked what fact justified continuing the detention after his identity and vehicle ownership had been confirmed. He never raised his voice. He never refused a lawful instruction. He never attempted to leave after Derek told him he was detained. Judge Mercer paused the recording. Officer Vaughn is asking for the factual basis of a detention, the behavior you described as argumentative? Derek hesitated. It felt confrontational at the time. I'm not asking how it felt. The courtroom became still. I'm asking what he did. Derek looked toward Malcolm for the first time that morning. Malcolm did not react. Judge Mercer resumed the footage. Ethan offered the hotel video. Derek declined. Dispatch reported no additional description. Derek continued the stop. Then came the exchange Derek had replayed in his head for weeks. His own voice said that Malcolm could explain everything to a judge. Malcolm answered that he would. The recording stopped. Judge Mercer turned toward Malcolm. Did you tell Officer Vaughn that you were a senior military judge? No, Your Honor. Why not? Malcolm looked toward Derek, not with triumph, but with the same controlled expression he had worn under the hotel lights. Because my position should not have been required before the facts were taken seriously. Silence followed. Derek had spent 3 weeks fearing the power of Malcolm's title. Sitting there, he finally understood that the title was almost irrelevant. The dispatch audio mattered. The registration mattered. The hotel footage mattered. Ethan's offer mattered. The body camera mattered. Even Derek's own wording mattered. Judge Mercer closed the file in front of her. This hearing is not about whether Mr. Hayes was an important person. It is about whether the continued detention remained justified as the information changed. Derek looked down at the report he had once believed would protect his decisions. For the first time, he saw it for what it truly was. Not a shield. A record. And every record eventually asks the same question of the person who created it. Can you explain what you did when the facts were no longer on your side? Judge Caroline Mercer returned to the courtroom after a brief recess, carrying only a thin folder and the same composed expression she had worn throughout the hearing. Derek Vaughn sat beside department counsel with his hands resting near the report he had once believed would justify everything. Across the room, Malcolm Hayes remained still. No uniform. No rank on display. No visible satisfaction. Judge Mercer looked down at the record. The court finds that the initial inquiry was supported by the limited information available when Officer Vaughn arrived. Derek lifted his eyes. But an investigative detention must be reassessed as circumstances change. The room seemed to grow quieter. Mr. Hayes provided identification. His ownership of the vehicle was confirmed. Dispatch supplied no additional description connecting him to unlawful activity. Hotel security offered immediate footage capable of testing the original suspicion. That footage was declined. The detention, nevertheless, continued. Derek stared at the table. Judge Mercer continued. The court therefore finds that the continued detention exceeded what the remaining facts reasonably supported. There was no dramatic reaction. Malcolm simply lowered his eyes for a moment, then looked forward again. The ruling entered the record. By that afternoon, the police department confirmed that its internal affairs review would examine the same body camera footage, dispatch recording, hotel video, witness statement, and written report. The court had answered the legal question. The department would answer the professional one. Outside the courtroom, Captain Stephen Brooks waited near a row of tall windows overlooking the courthouse steps. Derek emerged carrying his folder. Brooks handed him a notice. You are being reassigned from field duty while the administrative review continues. Derek read the page slowly. So this is it. Brooks shook his head. No, this is the process. Derek looked through the glass doors and saw Malcolm speaking quietly with Major Allison Reed near the elevators. For several seconds, he considered walking away. Then he crossed the hallway. Colonel Hayes. Malcolm turned. Derek stopped several feet away. You knew this would happen. Malcolm shook his head. No, you are a judge. You knew how the evidence would look. I knew what the evidence showed, Malcolm said. That is different from knowing what another judge would decide. Derek glanced toward the courtroom doors. When? You smiled that night. I thought you were threatening me. Malcolm's expression softened slightly. I was not. Then what was it? Malcolm looked at him for a long moment. I knew there would eventually be a place where neither your badge nor my rank would be enough. Only the record would matter. Derek lowered his eyes. You could have told me who you were. Yes. You could have called people who would have made my life very difficult. Yes. Why did you not? Malcolm answered quietly. Because if you needed to learn that I was important before you treated the facts seriously, then telling you would have protected only me. Derek had no reply. Weeks later, Internal Affairs completed its review. Derek received formal discipline, additional training on investigative detention and bias, and a period of closer supervision before returning to patrol. Several earlier complaints involving similar discretionary stops were reopened. Some were substantiated. Others were not. Each was reviewed on its own evidence. Malcolm returned to his military courtroom and never used Derek's name from the bench. The encounter became neither a trophy nor a story about revenge. For Derek, however, it became something harder to forget. He had once believed authority meant having the power to stop someone, ask the questions, and control the moment. Malcolm had shown him another definition. Real authority begins when the person demanding answers is willing to answer for his own decisions, especially when the truth is quieter than the badge.